when I work with parents, they often question, they ask me, have I done it right? Did I do something wrong? How could I have done it better? So there is a lot of self-reflection, which is really, 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 really healthy, actually. But I also am very mindful of the emotional burden that adoptive parents carry all the time. And that's mixed with love, right? It's
Oh, yeah.
it's so complex and it's so raw and it's beautiful, but also really difficult.
Will my adopted child be okay? What will their future look like? Where did I go wrong? Hi, neighbor. I'm Tim, an adoptive parent and adoption mentor. If you're a struggling adoptive parent searching for answers in your parenting journey, you're in the right place. I teach Christian adoptive parents how to be okay, even if their kids aren't, by anchoring them in biblical principles. Anchors of hope and healing are on the way. Today, I want to welcome my neighbor from London via Hong Kong and New York, Crystal Luk-Worrall. Crystal Luk-Worrall is a music therapist, EMDR practitioner, and clinical supervisor specializing in helping children and families heal from early trauma. As the founder of Clap and Toot, she integrates creative therapies to support emotional regulation, attachment, and trauma recovery, particularly for adoptive families. With a background in music therapy from Guildhall School of Music and Drama and extensive experience working with children, Crystal has spoken at major conferences and been featured on industry podcasts. Through her clinical work, speaking engagements, and training, she is dedicated to making trauma-informed therapy more accessible. Thank you for joining us today, Crystal.
Hello, thank you for having me. I was born in Hong Kong and then I
Okay.
moved to New York, lived there, studied there for a couple of years before I moved to London.
I've had other people from London be on the podcast before, so it's great to have you here today. And as we get right into our discussion, one of the first things that stood out to me when I was reading your bio was that you are an EMDR practitioner. And for those in my audience who aren't familiar with that term and that way of therapy, could you explain that to us?
Absolutely. EMDR stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. Quite a mouthful. It's always going to be a mouthful. um, and it's initially designed, or the way that it came up was to help people with PTSD, specifically soldiers back then. PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. And I don't know how much people know about PTSD, so I'm just going to go on and talk a bit about how trauma impacts our brain.
Okay.
And then we'll think a bit more about how trauma impacts on children, especially the children that we look after. The brain is very clever in keeping us alive. When something traumatic happens, or I should say when something that our brain interprets as danger to us, we don't have time to go through the whole logical brain, the prefrontal cortex, to think through our options. So if you think about a tiger running towards you, by the time you finish thinking, okay, I can run, I could sit here, or I could pretend, you will be gone, you'll be dead. The brain does this really clever thing of taking a shortcut to a smaller part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the part of the brain that controls that keeps us alive. It controls breathing, it controls hunger, and also when it detects danger, it makes a split-second decision to keep us alive. That's its function. Mm-hmm. So it's really, really good because that's partly what makes us a really successful species. But the not so good thing about that part of the brain is that it's so small and it's so primal that it doesn't quite have the same processing capacity as the prefrontal cortex or the other part of the brain. So when our brain uses the amygdala to respond to danger, what it tends to do is that memory gets stuck there for some time. And again, using the tiger as an example, in ancient time, you do need to remember that if a big orange fluffy thing is running towards you, it's danger. So that's why that mechanism is there. So the brain tries to remember things that that are dangerous to us. And so next time it happens, we know to immediately jump or run or do whatever we need to do to keep us alive. There is a capacity. So in EMDR, we believe that we naturally have a capacity to upload those memories from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex. An example would be, if you broke your nose when you were 5, at the time, you're going to think, oh my goodness, that is the worst thing that happened to me. This is the worst pain I've ever known. But when you're 35, you look back to it, you just think, oh yeah, that time when I was little, I broke my nose. It's no biggie. So that tells us that our brain is naturally able to upload those traumatic memories from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex, so it can do all the processing and it can talk to other memories, so we can have different perspectives. But sometimes that uploading doesn't happen automatically. That could be because of loads of reasons. That could be because when the person experienced the trauma, their physical health is struggling. So we don't quite have the physical capacity to do that uploading. Or more likely, in our case, when we talk about children who have experienced trauma, is that when the trauma happened, their brain hasn't developed enough for that natural uploading to happen. And also, we sometimes work with children who are repeatedly exposed to trauma, repeatedly exposed to abuse or neglect. Remember what I said earlier about the brain needing to remember things that do pose us danger. So those children who experience repeated trauma, their brain is going to remember that, because the brain is so functions to keep them alive. And that's what made them a champion. I mean, they survived, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when that uploading doesn't happen, those traumatic memory get trapped in our amygdala. And a very good way to tell if something is trapped there is if you remember it exactly the same way every single time. So if you talk with a soldier who has PTSD, they might tell you things like, every time I hear the siren going, I feel like I'm right back there. And it was exactly the same as I was when the thing happened. Now, that's a really, really good indicator that the memory is trapped in the amygdala. It hasn't been processed properly. If the memory has been uploaded to the prefrontal cortex, it's able to talk to other memories. It's able to change over time. Another problem with those memories being stuck is that it's going to make the child feel like they're always in danger, or anything that reminded them of the trauma, as little as the smell of bread, can trigger them. Sometimes when people say, my child just get triggered so easily and I don't know why, most of the time is because of a sensory input that informed the amygdala that they are in danger, or reminded the amygdala of what happened in the past. Sometimes, because it's so subtle, it's very hard to tease it out for people. So sometimes people think it's random, but most of the time it's not. When those memories get trapped in the amygdala, that's when people have PTSD-like symptoms. So the flashback, or the constant sense of danger, inability to focus. Because if you imagine your body is always trying to look out for signs to check whether you're safe or not, how can you focus on maths? How can you focus on thinking about geography? Your body is constantly thinking that you're in danger. So, and another thing is sleep disruption. So children who have experienced trauma or who have PTSD or complex PTSD might really struggle to sleep. Difficulty with regulating. So a very small thing could set them off, get them very dysregulated, very upset, and it takes them a long time to calm down. So these are all examples of symptoms that children with PTSD might experience. Finally, I'm coming to it. EMDR is designed to help us upload those memories that are stuck in the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex. That is the simplest way I can say it. Now, we know that to be able to upload those memories, we do need children to revisit some of the memories. That's how the brain works. But we also know that it's very distressing. And most people wouldn't want to wouldn't want to go there, right? I mean, adults wouldn't want to go there. And sometimes it's not even conscious. Sometimes when we ask children to think about something in the past, they either get very hyperactive. Oh, I need to do this. I got to do that. I've got to constantly move. I need to wiggle. Or they go what we call hypoactive. So they are very low. They physically feel quite cold, very tired all the time. So those are the ways that the brain can avoid going to revisiting the trauma. So the brain is so clever, isn't it? So the way EMDR works is because we know it's distressing, so we incorporate bilateral movement. And by bilateral movement means any movement that involve us moving left, right, alternatively. So tapping left, right. Walking is a bilateral movement. The Macarena is a bilateral movement. Boxing is bilateral movement. But more than anything, we know that moving our eyes left to right are very difficult for the brain to do because it's not a thing that we do most of the time. I mean, we walk all the time, so our brain is used to it. Moving our eyes left to right is very unfamiliar. And there is also some thinking around when we sleep, when we have deep sleep, our eyes also move left to right. Now, we don't know how the brain works fully. Nobody does. There seems to be some connection with dreamlike state with moving our eyes left to right. And essentially what we're doing is we ask someone to bring up the memory of a traumatic memory, and then we invite them to put their brain on overdrive by engaging in bilateral movement. And then they don't need to tell us what's happening in the head, but I just tend to invite them to say, just bring up the image that represents the worst part of the memory and see where it takes us. Because essentially, we are following a train of thought. We are allowing the uploading to happen. And we know that uploading can happen very differently for different people. I think what I just talked about was what we call standard protocol in EMDR for adults. And I'm guessing most of you who are listening would think, gosh, that sounds like the most boring thing that I can put my child through. That's why we have adaptations in EMDR for children, because number one, some children don't remember the trauma. When they experience the trauma, they don't have language capacity yet. Therefore, they can't tell us and they wouldn't remember the narrative in their head. So we need to be quite clever about how we work around that. Number two is like what I said, if I ask a 8-year-old child to move their eye left to right and remember something that's really traumatic for them, they're not very likely going to engage. It's not fun. In EMDR work with children, we sometimes do what we call a narrative. So I would talk to the parents, talk to the carers, gather the child's life story. So I know exactly what happened. Because while the child might not remember what happened to them verbally or in language, their body remember. Remember, we talked about the amygdala. The amygdala remember, and the amygdala controls a lot of our body's sensory system. So their body would remember. And when we write narratives, we are quite careful in that we don't name the child to begin with. So I might say something like, once upon a time, there is a little girl who lives in a little village. And when she was born with beautiful, bright brown eyes and dark black hair. And she was loved by her birth mother. And she remembered how warm it feels to be cuddled, how loved she felt, and that fuzzy feeling in their body. So we incorporate a lot of sensory information into the story, and we always alternate the stories from some good bits and then some challenging bits, some good bits, some challenging bits. And we're also very careful with the language. So while we do the narrative, we invite the parents to offer the bilateral movement. So it might be the parents tapping the shoulders, or it might be the parents boxing with them, or it might be the child moving a ball between the left hand and right hand, so that the natural processing can happen. it usually what happens is towards the end, once we read the story once, you notice their body through the child's body language, which part is more triggering for them, and those are the part that we single out to work through. And we towards the end, we also try to change the narrative that they have for themselves, because if you think about a child who have experienced a lot of trauma, who have been neglected and let down by adults again and again and again, they might have a negative belief. It's very reasonable for them to have a negative belief, to think that or it might be something along the line, I'm unlovable. And part of the work of EMDR is to reframe that into a positive belief for them, for the child, to move from I'm unlovable to believing in their body and in their mind that I am lovable, I deserve love.
Those are interesting points. And it gets really deep. It gets really deep. Now, well, you said a lot of things, but one thing that really stuck out to me, and this is our case, we adopted our son, Johnny, at birth. He had trauma before he was born that we weren't aware of. And you've already said that there's children who can't verbalize the trauma they went through.
Yeah.
Now, I'm glad you started with the soldier analogy, because we understand PTSD with soldiers and being in war and how that can affect the person. And then it's easy to understand when a child has been physically and emotionally abused, when you can see bruises or whatever. But children who, as my son, experienced trauma in the womb, in utero trauma, your training and the way you can help them through EMDR works just like it would for a soldier or another child that's been abused.
Yeah, absolutely. EMDR, like I said, it's a doing therapy. It's not a talking therapy per se. And what I find with children going through EMDR is because the experience is quite intense. So if you think about having to process all the difficult experiences that you have been through in the past with someone you don't know really well, it's really intense. It's really hard work.
How you're able to use EMDR then to help these children regulate themselves. And I guess it sounds like the parents are involved in this too, are they?
Yeah,
Okay.
very much so. Very much so. The parents' role is very important. First of all, I get a lot of information from the parents before I even start doing the EMDR narrative with the child, because those information needs to be accurate. And very interestingly, at least in the UK, most children would have what we call a life story book. So a book. Do you have that in the US, a life story book, like a book that kind of records the child's journey of being adopted?
We kept records, and we knew as much of the history of the birth family, birth mother, etc., and we shared that as it was asked for. But as far as no, I've never really heard that term either. So that's
Oh,
interesting.
interesting.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
we did share information, and I'll just back up again. We were counseled, and this has been 25 years ago now for my oldest. We were counseled for the information that we had to give it to him as he asked for it, not to volunteer it, but to give it to him as he asked for it. And that's what we did. When he would ask a question, said, "Do you have pictures of my birth mother?" And we'd say, "Yes." He never asked to see him that time. But later on, he would ask to see them. And so we kept that information and we would disseminate it as it was asked for. So I don't know if that's the same thing as you're talking about or not, but you can explain that a little bit. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah, so in the UK, most children, when they are adopted, they would come with a life story book. And I guess the approach could be quite similar to yours. So the parents get given a book that has early photos or photos of the child with some of their most loved toys before they are adopted. They might have photos of the child with the foster carers, or a child with their birth family. We don't necessarily immediately share the whole book with the child, so every parent's approach is different. But sometimes, depending on which decade the book is put together, Sometimes those books are very informative in a factual way. Now, if we think about a child's brain, do you think a child would remember, yes, on the 18th of March of 1991, I was then handed over by the state to the foster carer named Cheryl? No, that's not what they're going to remember, right? Like,
Right. I can't
so
remember that far back either.
the most important process of EMDR, at least for me, is to see it from the child's perspective.
Uh-huh.
How does it feel to move to Cheryl? How does it feel to have a social worker who you don't know holding your hands and hand you over to someone named Cheryl who you have never met and said, this is who you're going to live with now? And as lovely as Cheryl is, this is completely made up, by the way,
Uh-huh.
it's not a real case. As lovely as Cheryl might be, the child might still have a lot of questions at the back of the head about their birth family. Why were they removed? So I'm trying to communicate in EMDR, communicate with the parents, gather a lot of information, and then reframe those information from the child's perspective. How might that feel in the child's body when they were handed over to Cheryl? How might that feel then later they were handed over to the adoptive parents who they maybe at the age of 3 who they don't necessarily know very well and don't have a secure attachment with? And how does it feel when they were expected to call these relative strangers mum and dad? And how did it feel how did it feel when they first experience, oh, this is what love is, this is what feeling safe is for the body? The parent's role would be to give me those information, and I will reframe it, write a script. I will then send it back to the parents and ask them, is there anything that I've missed? Could you think of anything else? And another role is to help regulate the child in the session, because as a therapist, I'm a stranger to the child, and you parents are the expert of your child. So I always say I'm an ally coming in
Okay.
to work with the experts. And you would know how to regulate your child best because you co-regulate with them all the time. You help them get to a place where, from being very upset to feeling calm all the time. And actually a lot of times children who don't or who haven't learned how to regulate, learn how to calm themselves down, look to trusted adults to help them calm themselves. So if I'm guessing you would have experienced something like that your child when they were younger will look to you when they feel quite upset.
Yeah, I can see that. I love the idea of it because when you're coming to someone like you to help with therapy, then all the information you can have is helpful. And so
Yeah.
that I can see where that would be so beneficial to, helping the child through the trauma situations. So my boys, they would look to me to kind of see how to calm down. I would take them for walks or whatever. But some of this stuff, because we didn't understand the nature of trauma, especially with,
Mm,
with newborns, we didn't know what we were dealing with. And so this podcast is designed to help parents, adoptive parents, realize what's going on so they can
mm,
do things like what you're saying
mm,
and understand where it's coming from, where the negative behaviors are coming from, because we
mm.
didn't know. And had we
Yeah.
known, we would have done some things differently.
Yeah. And that's one of the most challenging thing, I imagine, as an adoptive parent. When I work with parents, they often question, they ask me, have I done it right? Did I do something wrong? How could I have done it better? So there is a lot of self-reflection, which is really, 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 really healthy, actually. But I also am very mindful of the emotional burden that adoptive parents carry all the time. And that's mixed with love, right? It's
Oh yeah.
oh, it's so complex and it's so raw and it's beautiful, but also really difficult to experience, I imagine. And actually, that kind of questioning, self-questioning, I do that too as a therapist. So sometimes when I'm in a room with a child, we just don't quite connect, or sometimes the child becomes dysregulated. I question, what have you done? Could I have done something differently? And actually, one of the most helpful tools for me is to know myself, because those and be informed by those thoughts and feelings. Because in it, when you work with a child who have experienced trauma, they are not able to hold all those feelings in themselves. So what a child naturally do is to project it out to adults, especially adults that they trust. So an example would be, I have a 1-year-old toddler. So when she's hungry, and I don't know why she can't say. So when she's upset, she screams, just like most toddler. She screams and screams so loud that drives me nuts. And I, oh my goodness, oh, stop it. And then it clicked. That's exactly how she felt. That frustration that I felt, the frustration and the anger that I could name, it's hers, because she can't name it. So she needs to communicate through her behavior in a way that I experience it. Therefore, I can adjust myself and attend to her needs. And I think a lot of working with children who have experienced trauma is that reflective capacity on adults' part, that you experience it and you kind of need to separate it a little bit from you and look at it. Oh, where does this frustration and anger come from? Is it mine? Did I wake up on the wrong side of the bed? No, I didn't. So whose frustration and anger is this? And then you realize that, oh, wait a minute, maybe my child is trying to tell me something through their communication. Maybe it's not me. So there is a huge part of looking after yourself is to know yourself, is to accept those feelings and allow them to inform your actions.
Right. That's something that we were counseled on, especially when my son went to residential, was that we need to work on our stuff because we could get triggered from the behaviors. And so and I won't get too deep into this today, but the idea was we had to realize this was not personal to us. He was reacting to pain he was in, and we would just happen to be the recipients of it. And so, but you have to distance yourself from taking it personally and realizing you have a child in pain. And once you can flip that and look at it that way, your parenting impulses come into play and you want to comfort the child. You can divorce yourself of feeling attacked and going, oh no, this child needs me to reach in and love them. So that's just, when you were saying this, I was thinking, that we had to learn that. And it really helped when we were navigating some of these challenges. And I know I've talked to other parents, they have a hard time with this because it does feel so personal. And that's a whole nother thing, another discussion that I'd like to get into with another time, because parents need to know how to regulate themselves too. And
Absolutely.
so that's something we can talk about another time if you'd like. As we wrap up today, for parents who, have children, adoptive parents who have children with trauma, how would you tell them to begin this process of determining to pursue EMDR? What would you advise them in this? Because I wasn't familiar with it until we began this discussion today, and it sounds like there's some things that can be really helpful for adoptive parents.
I'd say the first thing, the most important thing is timing. So for EMDR to work effectively, the child does need to have some sort of stability. So if we're talking about a child who just moved into a new school, still adjusting to a new environment, then I think the best thing to do is to give them space to adjust to the environment. So stability is very important. And obviously they have they have a very supportive family. Another thing is if you are looking for if you're looking for an EMDR therapist, just check that they are trained to work with children and adolescents, because the EMDR core training train us to work with adults, and then you need to do a separate training to work with children. So just check that the EMDR therapist you looking at did do that training. And also I think it's warmth and understanding of the adoption process. So you want someone who understands the adoption community to work with your child.
Okay. What would be the youngest age you would even consider EMDR training for?
Oh, that is such an interesting question. Personally, I like to work with children when they're verbal, because even if I read the script in the easiest form, they need to understand the story. So I'd say when they start understanding stories, really, and that might be maybe 6, around the age of 6, depending on the child.
Okay. Because I was wondering how young you would approach this, since it's first geared toward adults and then you have to go in for more training. So, and then the stability thing, especially if you're talking about children who have been, adopted at an older age, not infant necessarily, but an older age. So that's fascinating again. So this has been really educational, and I want to thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And I hope to bring you back and we can talk about some of these other things, because there's so many facets to this that I think can be helpful to adoptive parents, and how we can assist our children to navigate these challenges that they have. So as we wrap up here, how can people reach out to you?
Email is probably the easiest way. So my email is crystal with a C at clapandtoot.com, or my website. Clapandtoot is clapping, because I run a music therapy practice. So there's a lot of musical reference, clapping as in you clap your hands, and toot, so TOOT, so CLAPAND TOOT.
Yeah, and this will all be in the show notes, so people can just click on links to reach out to you. But Crystal, thank you so much for being with us today. And it's people like you that can help adoptive parents like myself and others navigate these challenges in our parenting journey. So thank you so much for what you do.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I want to thank Crystal for sharing her knowledge about EMDR with us. It's reassuring to know there's a method that can support adoptive families in addressing trauma effectively. Here are a few of the takeaways. Number 1, EMDR therapy was initially designed for PTSD in soldiers, but it is also effective for children, especially those who can't verbalize trauma. Number 2, trauma can trap memories in the brain's amygdala, causing PTSD-like symptoms. EMDR helps upload those memories for processing through bilateral movements. Number 3, parents play a crucial role in the EMDR process by sharing information, helping regulate the child, and providing a supportive environment. Number 4, regulation is not just critical for children, but also for parents. Understanding the source of frustration and anger can inform actions. And finally, number 5, for those interested in EMDR therapy for children, ensure your therapist is trained specifically to work with children and adolescents and is familiar with the adoption community. Please see the show notes for the ways you can contact Crystal. That's all for this episode. I want to thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, this is Tim, encouraging you to do what you can now. I hope today's episode encouraged you to face the storms in your parenting journey with courage and confidence. If so, would you please share this episode with another adoptive parent? It would also bless me and the mission of this podcast if you would take a couple of minutes and leave a review for the show on Apple Podcast. Until next time, this is Tim, encouraging you to do what you can now.